Downstairs at the King's Head is London's oldest dedicated comedy room. The Comedy Store's been around for longer, but it's been in different venues. Downstairs at the King's Head has been in the same place for, I don't even know how many years, 30 or 40 years now.
You can't be gigging in London over the last 20, well, plus years or whatever it's been, and not have come through this club. And so he's seen us all at our best and at our worst.
It was one of the few places you could play, because when I started, there were only a limited number of venues that you could play at.
Instantly I came here and I felt like I was part of something. I felt like I was part of a community.
It's nicer than most clubs. That's just a fact, you know, atmosphere-wise.
And if you think of great acts like Richard Pryor, Billy Connolly, Les Dawson, none of them have played here.
When you begin, this is the big one. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I remember it was the first one that I did where you turn up and, oh my God, there are pictures of your heroes. There are the people that you watched growing up. They played in this club. Stuart Lee's there, Sean Locke's there. And I remember there was a Sean Locke quote of Sean saying this was the best club in London. It was like you had gone from open spot to being an actual comedian because you were playing downstairs at the King's Head.
The reason why I love doing it is because it's one of the few places where I feel like it's safe to die.
I feel I can take more risks here at this club. So I think a lot of like newer routines have been born here.
There was a show I did, eventually I did it in the West End, Fibber in the Heat. First time I did it on a Wednesday or Thursday night downstairs at the King's Head.
You were about to stand on the stage where Mark Lamar and Stuart Lee and Sean Locke and Joe Brand and Harry Hill and Harry Enfield had stood. That was massive.
Nobody really knew what they were doing. There was a lot of experimentation, and any bill, certainly down here on a Sunday, which was our night, would be rare to see more than 2 comics on a bill. You'd have magicians, musicians, poets, and audiences were willing to tolerate that without tutting and saying, "Where's my laugh?" You know.
Like, it used to be a smoky room as well. You could smoke indoors. So imagine this little low room. People were drunk, and the smoke was like, table deep. It had like a naughtiness or something about it.
And it was easier to start then, I think, when I did it, because I would say within 2 or 3 months of that first open spot I did here, I had a reasonable amount of paid gigs in the diary.
Everyone was in it together. There weren't so many people doing it that it felt enormously competitive either. It was a kind of shared resource. I was probably a much nicer person then as well, so I expect I was easier to get on with.
There were really good stand-ups there as well on the circuit then.
There was much more variety. Clowns, jugglers, they've had jugglers in here. And they had unicyclists in here, were performing like this on their bicycles.
So he'd get on the unicycle and he'd wedge himself like this and he'd go, ta-da! That would be the end of the act. You didn't have to do anything.
Chris Lynham there, holding a fire extinguisher. That's because he used to put a firework up his bum, and he would do that here in a small room. We didn't have health and safety assessments in those days. Similarly, Nina Conti would put her hand up that man with long hair's bum, live on stage. No one stopped her doing that. There was much more variety in the early days, before it got sort of more standardised, before people realised it was perhaps a career path, before any of our lot, as we like to call them, got onto television. One of my favourite acts of all time I saw here, for the first time, which was the Iceman, who was a man who melted ice.
Who was really a performance artist, I think. Anthony is his name, I think. Who would freeze a sort of 2-foot block of ice in his flat down in South London, come across London on public transport with an insulated bag, and over the space of 13 minutes proceed to destroy the block of ice to a piece of old loop of a 78 record that just kept rolling round every 18 seconds. and it would drive you mad, and then he'd finish the act and go home.
There's only one of the only act I can remember was two guys called Two Gorgeous Hunks. There was a fat one and a thin one, and they did sort of performance poetry, and they did a poem called The Apocalypso, and it was about how the nuclear war was going to destroy humanity, which is something we were very concerned about in those days. Obviously now we know we're all just going to die anyway through our own neglect of our environment. But back then it felt a bit more dramatic.
There was a guy who had, whose name I've forgotten, who nailed a teddy bear to a turntable of a record player turntable, and went round and did a knife throwing act.
Oh, the Brown Paper Bag Brothers, which was John Hagley and Otis Cannelloni.
Yeah, they were good.
What did they do?
They just did a show based on brown paper bags. It's just poems about brown paper bags, magic with brown paper bags, ventriloquism with brown paper bags. It
was deep, man.
And they had different size paper bags,
yeah,
which they got from the post office.
Variety, I think.
And one of the paper bags was the size of a human. So they get people up from the audience and put them in a paper bag and then do mind reading.
I'd play the piano with my bum or do something, just make it into part of the show. So that had that gone. And Pete didn't seem to care. I think he just was very much like in it for, I think he liked the chaos. I think he loved I know he wants the shows to run well, but I think he kind of enjoyed a bit of the chaos.
What the fuck is wrong with you? Holy fuck! Fuck you, man! Fuck you!
Well, Hugh Thomas, obviously, was the compere for all the years. Used to play the recorder, two recorders out of his nostrils and then pretend to have one up his bum because he had a recording of it, and,
You're all waiting for the answer. Couldn't give a shit about music. Discord, harmony, 15th century harmonies, beautiful dance tunes, they all go right over your head. When's he gonna play it from his arse? It's sad.
Went down there in 1980 or something, saw that there was an empty. I was looking for a place to run. I wanted a smoky dive. I wanted a filthy, smoky, jazz, obviously scurrilous and appallingly decadent little place, and I found it. And there it was downstairs with a little bar in the corner. And I asked the guy, and they said, yeah, you can try it. So if you want to run a Sunday night club down there. And so I opened up with a club with all my ex-students really doing stuff, and I ran that into the ground within about half an hour. So I rang Peter.
And then I know Hugh at the end of the night, instead of giving everybody the agreed 60, 70 pounds, he said, how much would you like?
Not a businessman, it's got to be said, yes.
Let's get one. I know it sounds very show busy, but just lean into me like this.
Well, you couldn't have the King's Head without Peter.
He gets all the simple things right, the basics right. Good sound system, good lights, focus in the room, always employs a good compere, very supportive, very funny as well. He's a very funny guy. He's got a great sense of humour.
Why have you never done it? Why have you never... Yeah.
I don't want to put people to shame.
He'll say, I saw so-and-so doing a gig the other night, and he'll quote some of the stuff. But he might even slightly improve it from what I've seen that happen as well.
The man loves comedy, and that's one thing that always comes through.
It's half a bath.
It's brilliant. Because it's humorous, you see. Did you want a few outside as well?
Have you got that teacher at school that, I was quite a naughty kid, so there aren't many of these teachers, but there are a couple that really helped me, that had kind of shown me that they had that they had confidence in me. And that's what Peter's like for me.
That's nice, yes.
Yeah.
Well, my wife says I'm actually looking at the camera there, which
I thought that, otherwise you're looking down.
Well, you're obviously like my wife.
I like your wife. I am like your wife.
No, both.
Pete Grahame's a big part of it for me because, you know, you know, he always says when I come down in my pyjamas. I don't. Once I came down, I live locally and I had a new bit that I needed to try. I thought, whoa. And it's just the bottoms. You couldn't really tell they were pyjamas and Ugg boots. And I just jumped up.
I said he's got this sixth sense, as well as being on the lookout for troublemakers in the crowd. He'd be talking to you in the acts room, telling you old jokes and stuff. But at the same time, he'd be listening to the acts and noting the response that they got, and he'd always be able to pick out good jokes.
Moan. We're in the garden, fireworks night. They're moaning, Dad, why can't we get actual fireworks?
Pete is one of the most supportive people in the comedy business, and he's not just important for London comedy. I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say, but he's important certainly for comedy in the UK, but also in the world.
Peter's maintained that high standard. He's got a feel for comedy, you know. He knows what he's doing. He's got a love for comedy. You know, he's not been doing this for the money.
And Pete also, can I say, is important because when you're on stage at a packed audience, looking, as every comic does, to the sound booth for some reaction from Pete, more often than not, you'll see him chatting with other comedians, which is a wonderful feeling of he really has no interest in anything I'm saying on stage, which can occasionally be mirrored by those in the audience.
He kind of is this club. I mean, obviously, he's this club. Him and Hugh, when they get together, are a completely brilliant double act.
And he came and made the place work, really, basically, and allowed me to do what I like doing best of all, which is greeting people at the door, like a priest, and then saying goodbye at the end. And Peter ran it and made it a success.
When I started stand-up almost 30 years ago, here was one of the first places that I came and tried out my stuff.
2001 or something like that. Essentially, that was probably my first gig after my comedy course, because this is one of the few places where they would let you on in spite of yourself.
Well, I would have first come here in about September 1989. I really hit the ground running with tryout spots.
My first one was probably the worst. I saw a guy in the corner just shaking his head. Like, I think probably about 30 seconds in, he was just like, we're just doing this.
I mean, I didn't really know how to be a comedian then, really. I sort of rehearsed it and sort of performed it like a bit like an actor would perform it.
I had put my name down, but I hadn't sort of planned anything. It was like maybe 6 weeks before. I was drunk in a pizza restaurant and my friend Danielle said, you should do stand-up. And I was like, yes, you're correct. Only one person. It wasn't like loads of people were telling me, one person. And then I came down and I sort of told myself, it doesn't matter if it's fun, whatever happens, it's gonna be a funny story. And I went on stage and it went well, like there was laughs. And immediately I had that sensation, I can just remember it so much, of it mattered straight away. It was like falling in love instantly, but with a wrong un.
When I first played here, I was still so new that I was incredibly nervous, and what I used to do, and I still get like this if I'm on occasion, for whatever reason, incredibly nervous, just constantly wee.
It was really exciting and terrifying. Like, even coming back now, all these years later, in the loo there, I was like, I've done a poo in these loos before.
I think I had about 2 minutes, but somehow I managed to get to 5. I don't know how I did the other 3, because after about 2, I didn't have anything else to say. So I just said, so who's from Crouch End? Who's from Crouch End? Like, they're like, we're all from Crouch End. Just get on with the jokes.
First gig, well, it would have been with Cork and the Juice Pigs. We were a trio, comedy trio. Sean Cullen, Greg Neal and I. Greg was really tall. He's like 6'1", bald, with hobnob boots. And so he was quite an aggressive looking figure. And a lot of his act was jumping up in the air. And I think the first time he jumped up in the air, he caught himself on the lights. And then we made some joke about it being Star Trek and standing under them and trying to get ourselves transported to another comedy club.
When was it the first time you gigged it?
Gigged here? 80.
No,
Peter will know better than me.
Yeah,
83 or something? 80?
Yeah, 84 probably, something like that. You would have been like 12 then.
I was 12 years old.
It's in the middle of North London, but when I started doing this, this was like an out-of-town gig to me. This was, I used to live in East End. I had to get a bus into Holborn or a tube, and then I had to get another tube to Finsbury Park, then I had to get a bus to here. This felt like going to Siberia or something when I started. I mean, now that you travel a lot, it isn't, but this was, when I started, the furthest away gig that I did. Like, if it wasn't in Zone 2, forget it.
So the idea of coming to a part of London that I'd never been to before and having to get on a bus to go up a hill, and I'm like, where the fuck am I going? Where is this place?
There was this old woman trying to figure out where the bus was. The W5 was on diversion. I knew exactly what to do. I wanted to help her out. I dropped to the ground. I found a stick and a patch of dirt, and I started carving out a map. Like, you can find the bus across from the Tesco, right near the Barclays. There's an alley. You can get the W5 through there. You can do this. You can do this.
Why was the King's Head so special? Why did you make it? Did you design
Low ceiling, obviously completely and utterly a low dive, you know, in every sense. 2 exits and entrance going upstairs, which made it kind of special to come down into.
Fire trap.
Fire traps, yes, the whole thing was a massive fire trap.
If the 19th century theatre designer Frank Matcham, who brilliantly lived about 200 yards from here, if he's designed a theatre, he manages to trap the laughs, no matter how high the roof is. That's what you need. You need the audience to be able to hear themselves laughing so they know they're having a good time. And you need to be able to hear them. And this room is great for that.
And we had queues down the road, literally. I had quite often, Peter would send me out, this was my lonely job, to go and tell the queue at the end that they weren't going to get in. Although, of course, I always said, yeah, I think we'll get you in somehow. But Peter got stricter and stricter about this.
I think Peter goes out of his way to use equipment from the 1960s. I don't think much has been updated. Even the backdrop is classically very old and traditional, and he's not going to change stuff because that would involve costing money. So from that point of view, it's a brilliant, if not somewhat caveman-like venue.
It always felt like a very local club. You know, people would talk about the High Street and budgeons in the High Street. It always felt like it was part of Crouch End. You know, there was a real sort of community centre to it. And it's really interesting the way the demographics of the front row have changed over the last 20 years or so, because, you know, in the early noughties, in the 90s, the front row there'd be a couple of students, a social worker, big Sunday night crowds would come along because it was cheap. You know, people just walk up to the door. Now you talk to the front row and it's, you know, a doctor, a stockbroker, a buy-to-let landlord.
Basically, a lot of wankers live around here now.
You know, so as the areas got richer, the demographics of the audience have changed.
You a serial killer? What's going on? Do you need a lawyer? I know one. Police officer? Fucking hell.
Muswell Hill was all dry. There's a couple of big churches on the main Muswell Hill Road, so it was dry, no bars. But ironically, those churches are now pubs, but there was no drinking. And down here, down the hill, is where all the lowlifes would live, and so you would have Karl Marx and all the famous writers and poets and stuff would sit in all the cafes and and smoke joints and stuff in all the little places around down in Crouch End. And they used to talk about walking down the hill and trying to roll back up. And so Crouch End has a history of being a place of a bit of deviance.
It's obviously cleaned up and it's had a facelift over the years, but I still think that a good comedy room needs to feel a little bit, you know, taboo, a little bit dangerous, a little bit sticky.
Good brick wall, though. That's what Americans think comedy clubs look like. If they haven't got a brick wall, they put one in. They wouldn't be able to cope with that. I mean, that must be 200 or 300 years old, that brick wall. There's a lot of 2-drink minimum comedy clubs doing 6-minute sets all night in New York would love a wall like that, but they can't have it. That's our British comedy wall.
It's certainly got the best atmosphere in terms of you've got the brick walls. You know, it seems like purpose-built. It feels like you're in New York.
This place is what I thought a comedy club would be like. I think you had a romantic idea of it, and most of them weren't really what you thought they'd be like.
You know, I'd imagined this just since I was a child. So the walking downstairs to the club that felt important. And then you come down here and look, the ceiling, I mean, you can barely stand. It's perfect.
It physically feels quite a different space to a lot of clubs. You can almost feel like a giant or something here.
And every night is so different. You have to really play the room, and that's one of the things that I definitely learned here.
You know, it's not a massive room. It feels like it when you're starting out. It feels ginormous. They feel on top of you. The different levels of seating. So there's chairs, then there's small stools, then there's higher stools, then there's steps up. There's just this kind of this scattered leveling of the audience that it kind of creates this feeling that they're like here. And the lights, just the blackness, I loved that. All you get is the sound of laughter. That, for me, is the best feeling. That's one of the best things about this club.
The energy is just phenomenal. And they're, you know, just packed in. It's hot and it's sweaty and it's, you know, the intensity of the laughs in a room like that. There's just nothing like it.
And when those laughs hit you, I mean, it's so solid. Just blackness with that laughter. It could be 10,000 people. That's the feeling that this room gives you when you're up there. This is the perfect comedy club.
I always say that there's comedy in the walls down here. I love to come down before anyone's even touched it. And when I'm setting up the lights and the sound and the music and getting everything ready, there's a real calm about it, but it's always really touching because there's just comedy here. You can smell a lot of things down here, but I always think you can smell the comedy as well.
I used to do a routine when I was warming up the crowd, comparing routine, which is I'd find out who was from North London and who was from South London and who was from wherever. And then I'd do my little guide to North London based around the area of the room. So if you were in the front row, you had the best seats, the best view, so that was Crouch End. And then just behind, in this area over here, where there tend to be high chairs, so everyone over there is looking down on Crouch End, that would be Muswell Hill. And then you come over here, so the view to the stage here is not as good as Crouch End, so they aspire to Crouch End, so that would be Hornsey over here. And then over there, the view from that side's not very good either, but the transport links to the loo and the bar upstairs are much better, so that would be Finsbury Park. And then at the back in the shadows over here, where the view's rubbish and you can't really see, that would be Wood Green. And that's where you go for cheap mangoes.
I always think there isn't a comedian on the walls that hasn't played down here. And I'm not sure, because hasn't even Robin Williams been down here?
There wasn't any of this here. There weren't all these photos of people. There did used to be a big picture of me here, but I seem to have been replaced.
My picture's here somewhere, but, you know, and actually my picture's there. You see this board here? That's where my picture is.
You're on the wall there. You're on the wall.
I am on the wall. The old wall, when you come in upstairs, I don't know if you got a shot of this, but it used to have a big, and it had Rona Cameron, Michael Smiley, things. I can't remember who's on it. We can go and look. But I'm on like the bottom right-hand corner. So if you go into the dressing room, you'll see all the faces, and I am behind the sofa on the bottom, right where all that sewagey smell comes out.
Yeah. The pictures, in a way, are dishonest that are up because they're cherry-picked to give the impression that there's some sort of meritocracy at work and that all these people that have passed through here, you recognise their faces, and that proves, therefore, that there's some kind of cosmic justice at work. But there are so many people here, not represented here, that were brilliant.
I remember seeing Dave Chappelle down here. First, I'd never heard of Dave Chappelle, and just absolutely brought the house. I mean, it was brilliant stuff. I can't remember who it was who had to go on after us, but I remember they looked like they'd seen a ghost. They had to go. They'd come down for a nice, friendly gig at the King's Head. Suddenly, they're having to follow Dave Chappelle after doing his best 10. You know, I mean, a tough gig.
One of those early times I was here, like Frank Skinner was on, and he was trying out new stuff, and he was on just before. Like I think it was me, then the interval. And then Frank Skinner turns up and they're like, you're on after Frank. And it's like, oh no.
We've had Jon Stewart here, and Dave Chappelle, Jim, what's his name?
Steve Martin?
No.
Chris Rock?
No.
The
Look
one
at these
who's
old
got
fucks. Look, two old fucks fucking things up, but still having fun.
Yeah. So who's the most famous person who's ever been down here?
Oh, really?
Dylan.
Bob?
Yeah.
On the comedy night?
No.
Eddie Izzard turned up one night, like just turned up because he was mates with the owner, and then he was just so nice, and then he went on stage and the audience went mental. They were just like, ah! And that's one of the things I love comedy. It doesn't really happen in the acting world. Like, you're not just going to get Tom Cruise just turning up to one of your auditions or something like that. That doesn't happen, but in comedy, that's why I love it. Big stars just turn up.
We were kind of in that. I mean, we were over when Eddie did doing his first gigs indoors with the Juice Pigs. So he would have been playing here at the time. And Joe Brand, we did gigs with Joe Brand and Lee Evans, Jack D. And they would have all played here at some point. I mean, imagine Lee Evans in this room. If you imagine, if you go, what people will go and see in stadiums, imagine putting that on that little tiny stage, the place would be falling apart.
But he's from an old show business family as well. So he as a kid, like, knew all of the big stars used to come around his house to visit. So I think he's completely unfazed by any sense of celebrity at all. I think he's really interested in the craft of comedy, but I don't think he's starstruck at all. He's anti-starstruck. I think you couldn't suddenly be a big celebrity and get too big for your boots and come down here, and I don't think he'd put up with that.
I've had to overcome something where I think, oh, they won't like me. And this is one of the gigs that has made me think, of course they'll get me. Even if they're middle class, even if they come from a different background, they still get you. Funny's funny. And this is one of the gigs that's definitely taught me that if you're funny, they'll get it, whether they're, from Crouch End or not.
There's a couple of regulars called Ben and Joe. And Joe is a woman who actually, she knits. She comes and does her knitting. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then since then, we know each other now and all that sort of stuff. But I always watch other acts to see how they deal with the knitting woman. And she's just a local comedy fan, and they know their comedy stuff. Just like most of the audience that comes here, they're very, very comedy literate. So their expectations are quite high on what they see here. And but they're very smart. I always see how people who play here for the first time, when they see Joe knitting in the front, how they deal with it. And often, that's one of the tests.
How do you deal with the knitting one?
Well, the first time, not so well. It kind of threw me off. I mean, you know what it's like, Joe. I mean, when you have somebody who's doing something, even if they're looking at their phone, but if you have somebody who's making a hat.
One night, Stuart Lee was sort of press ganged into doing this gig because he'd previously cancelled a gig on Pete, and then Pete called in the favour. But this was now when Stuart was getting a bit of TV and stuff, and he really didn't want to do it, and he was so grumpy, and he was down here, and he was just moaning before the gig. Oh yeah, I don't want to do it. Oh, thing is, right, this happened, and then... So he came on, so he was sort of didn't want to do it, and then Stuart came on stage, and a guy yawned just in the front row. He yawned, and so Stuart Lee just did his whole set for 20 minutes and that guy yawning, and it was really funny. But I wondered if he was just trying to, technically fulfill his obligation to do the gig, but not actually do anything. I mean, it went on for 20 minutes. He went, what did you see at the weekend? I went to see the Yawning Man. The Yawning Man at the King's Head. Was the comedians on, Stu? No, but there was a man yawning in the front row. It was really great. I think it was... And it went on. It's one of those things that you think, this can't sustain itself. But it just did. Surely any sane comedian would bail on this. It's working well, get out now. 2 minutes in. But went on for 20 minutes. And it got to the point where you couldn't have done anything else. When you get in 10, 15 minutes, you're committed, aren't you? You can't do 15 minutes on a guy yawning and then a tight five at the end about trains or something, I don't know. You once, you know, it'd just be, wouldn't sit well, would it? It'd be a juxtaposition. So it was interesting how being jaded could actually work in comedy's favour sometimes. That he was so jaded about doing the gig, and then a man yawned at him and he felt worse, and it sort of produced this moment of comic genius.
Well, I don't remember that, but it does seem like something I would have done. But what happens in the room is the show, and that is really doable here. I'm very pleased that Steve has such fond memories of it, and I would encourage him to set up a website called Memories of Stuart Lee, where young comedians can put down things that they remember me doing, because I can't remember any of them.
Yeah, Thursday nights we see 14 acts doing 5 minutes every Thursday, and that's been since 1986.
And it's still going to this day, the Thursday night. It's incredible. It's a night where new acts can try stuff.
I was too fat to be a singer, apparently.
Anyone can have a go at it, which means it's a brilliant roller coaster ride. But also you find the diamonds in the rough down there, and it's where everyone starts, and it's where everyone gets the opportunity to have the experience of being, we call it the sticky carpet of broken dreams.
I used to come and sometimes see them if I wasn't on, just because the conveyor belt of dashed hopes was always fun to see.
Because that's kind of what it is. Everyone can have a go, and some people walk onto stage and they're like fully formed. They're all ready to go, and you kind of are taken aback by it, and other people give it their best shot. But I always think you learn as much from the people who can't do it as you do from the people who can do it. It's a fascinating evening, the Thursday. And I think because it's been one of the longest running comedy nights, it's got that real buzz about it. The audience know about it. The performers know about it. It's quite a big deal. I would say it's almost a rite of passage in the comedy world, kind of doing the tryout night. And you feel like if you get laughs in that and you get a round of applause in that, then you're doing all right at comedy. There was a guy who came on, and it was his first night. He shouldn't have announced it was his first ever gig. But I think it meant that the audience were really supportive. And when he dried, and he dried spectacularly, he just froze. And the whole audience started clapping. And then someone in the back just went, "You can do this, come on." And I thought, yeah, that just sums up this club. That's why this club is special. Because in other places you get booed off, but here the audience go, "No, come on, we've got this, we can do it together."
I think it's really important to have somebody who's like, "Dory, you're not shit." "Oh, good, thank you."
We nurture and we encourage and we develop, and if we want to, we'd stagnate. And that's why that night, the Thursday, is just the most important night, because that feeds the pro nights. And also it feeds the circuit.
And he's given me more chances than he should have done.
He provides a forum for a huge number of acts that have gone on to do greater things and to become established acts, and those that have just done it the once and have enjoyed themselves or didn't enjoy themselves. But he's created all that.
And because Peter's booking policy is just whoever calls and books, no matter how far out it is, you're going to get a spot, which also means that almost any Thursday that you come down, I think even now, you get people on that are just that little bit unhinged.
Fuck off, you pathetic pieces of shit. Fucking hell, you almost gave me the same reaction to picking something off the ground as a guy with a flute up his arse.
But I still think the biggest buzz, I love that on a Thursday night, watching people, because when you get your first ever laugh or even round of applause, it must be the most spellbinding experience.
I'm in my 30s. I hope I don't look it. Do you know what I mean? I think I look like I'm in my 20s.
Downstairs at the King's Head is written on the back wall. And on a comedy tryout night, I think people aren't quite used to how bright the lights are going to be when they get onto stage. And their first reaction is to move backwards away from the light in order to get out of the light. You never get out of the light. And they move backwards, and for some reason to the left, and they can't go any further than the wall. So the G from downstairs at the King's Head has been completely robbed off the wall from people just going like this at the back going, get me off stage, when is my 5 minutes up? My favourite part is genuinely when people go from being nervous about going on stage to you seeing that they're just doing it because they love it. And that's such a big leap.
Once you've done it a few times, you sort of like become part of the family.
And then the nerves that were there of trying to do well on a Thursday, to hope to get to a Sunday, and then if the Sunday goes well, then there's a chance of a Saturday, and just building it up, and those moments of going up to Peter, sitting in that booth, and, hi, can I talk about coming back? Call me. Okay, thanks, bye, you know.
The validation you get when you get a Sunday, and he says, you know what, yeah, I'm gonna give you a Sunday. That feeling is like, that's pretty much the first affirmation that you get as a newish comic that you're just not mental. That you actually might have a future as a comedian. And then you maybe get a 20 minutes on a Sunday, and then you get a Saturday.
You can have that on your comedy CV, and everywhere in the country will go, he's doing downstairs, she's doing downstairs on a Saturday night at the King's Head. You can book them in securely, knowing that they've come up through the ranks, they've been watched probably 10, 20, 30 times, and the people who know have advanced them to a Saturday, and I think that's a brilliant way to kind of get forward in the comedy business. It's where you start. It's lovely.
Who here actually is in that blissful position of actually living in Crouch End? There, you see, he could hardly speak with smugness.
He always liked compares that were warm and welcoming and friendly and charming and so on, and so that friendliness would be reinforced at the top, and that was part of his way of there not being any trouble. He never liked aggressive, you know, compares who are, what do? You're a bit of an idiot, that kind of, he didn't like that.
If I hurt myself, I'm going to sue you. You're on the daddy long.
Peter has very specific rules about how he wants the room emceed. And if you deviate from those, he will express that as a direct concern. So, you know, the last act is not the headliner. I made that mistake once. It's very clear. Everyone is the same. But I think it was someone closing who was, I mean, they were the headline act. It was like Phil Nichols. He was like someone like, this person is coming to close the show. And I had mistakenly said headliner. And there was a conversation in the green room about that. The window was shut, which was usually a good thing. Usually if Peter shuts the window in the booth, that meant he was going to tell you an off-color joke that he'd heard somewhere. But sometimes when that window got shut, you got in a little bit of trouble.
You're an accountant for Amazon? Fucking, that must be the most easiest job in the world. Well, Jeff, another fucking billion.
And Peter came up to me once after a gig, and he was just sort of tidying away the mics, and he just sort of went, I very much like what you're doing, it's really good, carry on with that. And then about a year later, Hugh Thomas, who'd been the compere here for many years, retired ill, and Peter said to me, you know, I'd really like you to do Hugh's job. It was one of the rare times when somebody shows real belief in you and real confidence in you. And he did it at just a time in my life when I just got divorced and some of my work stuff wasn't going that well. And he showed real confidence in me, and it was very empowering. And I've been the compere here for 20 years nearly, and I sort of see it as a home from home.
And I phoned them up, and this lady answered the phone, and she went, BBC pronunciation unit. Now, I'm all for equal opportunity. Is there anything else? We've got to kind of draw the line somewhere. Anyway.
You know that to book it, you can't just email. You have to, on a Monday morning at 11 o'clock, phone this man who'll give you a spot. And at the time, I was working in a private clinic, and I used to have to book a special break on a Monday to go and creep into one of the rooms and make the phone call with my sweaty hands. And us comedians who famously love saying the worst thing thinkable on stage, then lose their minds having to call this man and book themselves in. It's terrifying.
I kept missing the 9 till 11 slot because I was teaching and lessons would finish at 11:05. So I remember one Thursday morning or something, I think it was a Friday morning, I ran out of a lesson that I was teaching just in order to get the slot. So I phoned him just before 11 and remembered, so I was glad to get on.
You had to phone in between something like 9 o'clock in the morning and like 11 o'clock in the morning. And I was never up at that point. So I had to get up. And I was in my parents' house and I had their like cordless phone. I was really nervous about it. And I phoned the number and it's ringing. And then there's just this voice answers the phone. And he goes, yes! And it's like, ugh. And I say, oh, hello. I'm like 25 and I'm scared, right? I'm like, hello, I'd like to book a comedy gig, please. He goes, I'm going to need to know your name. And I'm like, oh. And I'm thinking, I thought we were having a conversation. And I said, oh, my name's Nick Helm. And he said, fine, September the 25th. And then I put the phone down. And I think that's like the first hurdle of being a stand-up comedian is whether you can handle a phone call with Peter Grahame.
I mean, I didn't say I was funny. I said, I came here on Thursday and I was wondering if I can get a spot. My name's Jenny Collier and I've done this gig and that gig. And then he'd just be so chilled out of the other and he'd be like, yeah, I can put you in for the Sunset Day. And he'd be like, thank you so much.
He frightened me at first. He was like this mythical person. He was like, call between 9 and 11 Monday to Friday to get booked in. And I remember calling him once and he went, I haven't got a pen, call me tomorrow. I was like, oh God.
And at the time I thought he was mad, and now I totally get it. When you get busy, it's so funny because when you're young, you're not busy. You're like, this guy with his 9 to 11, and then you get busy and you go, you've got a 15-minute window here.
Because I've got this rule about you only ring me between 9 and 11 weekday mornings to get a gig, and that's to stop the phone from ringing all day, and it's also to stop, it's to also sort out who's serious. The amount of people who go, I don't get up till 1, you know. And so, well, you're not going to get anywhere because the good acts work all day and they write and they think and they practice. I mean, you came up with a joke a few years ago, didn't you?
It's not about me.
When I see new people come through the door, I generally get a vibe straight away whether they're going to be useless or okay or good. Usually it's the quieter ones or the good ones. The people who just sit down, gather their thoughts, think about what they're going to do. I hear a lot of people who say how good they are, and they generally aren't. So that's something you learn over the years.
I think he's got a genuine rapport with people, and I think it's his experience and his knowledge and his ultimately, I mean, I've worked out that I watch about 650 comedians a year. And that's me over the last, if you times that by 8, that's how many comedians I've seen. And if you times that by 40, that's how many comedians, obviously some of them repeats, but that's how many comedians he's seen do stand-up. And so that's what he brings to the table. He just knows comedy and he knows it inside out.
Peter's here and Peter will pay attention and watch you and give you some kind of feedback. Oh, you should stop doing that. Or maybe you said that word too many times, whatever it is. And when you're starting and really all you have going is your faith in yourself, it's really encouraging and lovely to have someone pay you who you respect and to get someone in the industry as such who's seen it all before to go, wait a minute, oh, that was a good joke. That kind of encouragement can keep you going.
He's got this magical way of being able to sum up a comedian in a sentence, like what they can do to improve or what they can do to get better. And it may only be a sentence, but it's a sentence that you could have written on your gravestone at the end of your life. This is how I could do better, or this is what I'm getting right.
If you tried something new and it failed, you feel like he would understand that.
He's brilliant because he's critical and he knows what works and he knows what doesn't work. So when he tells you something, I mean, even established acts who've been doing it for 20 years, 30 years, still go in and ask him, does this joke work? Why doesn't this joke? That's fascinating when you're in the box and they come in and they say something like, that's funny. Why isn't it fun? Why is no one laughing? And you go, yeah, why is it? And he can rework it for them.
Even in 1989, he'd seen a lot of acts. So most of his advice to acts was not about whether he particularly liked them or not. It was more practical, you know, about how were they going to get what they did to work and whether they'd be appropriate for here.
Have you ever said give up?
No. I've told people to change.
I think that Peter believes in sort of like tough love.
He would always take the piss out of me, and I felt like, oh, that meant he liked me. Do you know what I mean? It's a kind of... It's a flirting, isn't it, for men?
If you go into the room, little sort of sound booth after the gig, and he says, well, you got away with that, that's a good thing. That's a compliment.
He says, well, what do you feel comfortable doing? And I said, well, I'm doing hours. And he goes, really? Because, to be honest, you struggle with 5 minutes.
He still treats everybody the same. Now, that's not to say that he treats everybody amazingly, but at least he treats them the same.
For Peter's treatment of them, so many of the songs that I wrote were infinitely better.
I give advice to the sort of anti-advice to all, the opposite of what is asked of those sort of clubs is, you know, bring somebody to add the numbers or bring friends. I actively say don't, because you're not going to learn anything. Your friends are going to tell you you're good when you're shit, and if you know it doesn't, you don't work it out.
I think I spent the first couple of years of stand-up thinking I was amazing and not understanding why I couldn't get further. So I think I remember one of his notes was no real joke check. And I was like, oh. I wasn't like put out by it, but I thought he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about.
And I always keep a few sentences on each person.
I'd love to read his notes. Can you imagine what that book must be like?
Would you like to see?
Oh, God. I mean, I can imagine. I know. I mean, I've always had a fairly honest assessment of my own abilities in comedy.
It told me when I first started working here, and I was talking about Barry Cryer and how Barry Cryer knew everything to do with comedy. And he said, you know Barry Cryer phones me, don't you? And I said, does he, Peter? Does Barry Cryer phone you? He said, yeah, if he's got a new joke, he wants to check that no one else is doing it. And he knows that I will know. So I thought, yeah, fair enough. You are the font of all knowledge when it comes to comedy.
Pete Grahame knows loads of jokes. And he knows loads of musicians' jokes as well, like 100 jokes about drummers, 100 jokes about pianists or whatever. And I love those traditional jokes, and I like, they give me ideas to fuck with them and make them into really tortuously long routines, where I get the idea from some old joke, and Pete was always really good for old jokes. Smells the same as it ever did, damp, and like too many comedians have been in here. But what a brilliant, brilliant place.
Most of the best, for the funniest moments have been in the dressing room. You know, and Peter probably everyone will say this, but Peter always had a new joke. And I was going, oh, that's a great joke, I'm going to tell that one. But and he loved drummer jokes because he's a jazz musician, wasn't he? So he loved making drummer jokes. And one of them was, they hear about the drummer that got kicked out of the band and he felt so bad he wanted to commit suicide, so he threw himself behind a train. No, that was wrong. I didn't fuck that up. His timing was so bad. He threw himself behind a train. Anyway. Get Peter to tell it. He'll just look at me and go, oh my God.
Often that can be the highlight of the evening, just taking the piss out of each other down there, really. And with Peter cracking his jokes that you've heard a few times before.
Some of them are very, very funny, and some of them are corny as hell, but they're always said with charm.
Guy on the desert island, just him and Angelina Jolie, and 2 weeks, 4 weeks, a few months go by, and eventually they make love. And the next morning, he says to her, can I ask a favour? And she says, what? He says, could I put a little moustache under your nose and call you Frank? And she says, all right. So he does so, and he says, yeah, Frank, you'll never guess who I'm shagging.
It was a real special space. Pete would be behind here. Oh, look, this is where they've still got my picture. It's just gone into the dressing room away from the public. So he would sit here, and one of the great things about it was I was a real music fan, and Pete, who was very old then, he would have been maybe 35, something like that.
It's a lovely backstage, isn't it?
Well, it's not, but this is where you get all the filth, you know. See? There you go, you can start with that on.
The dream that you kind of can't imagine is you want to get in the room with Pete. See, when you're an open spot and you're here on the tryout nights or the Thursday, you can sit where you want, but you end up kind of sat around that table near the door, and the MC will be stood in the door, and the MC can go in the room with Pete, but you can't go in the room with Pete. You're just an open spot. And I think I got in that room quite quickly, and I remember feeling like I'd made it. I'm in the room with Pete. I've done it. I felt like the real deal. Do you remember me? When you get in the room, you get to stand in the room with Pete. The greatest thing about that is you don't have to watch the other acts. You just talk to Pete. And it's weird because I've been on telly and I've, done various things. But that's not what is kind of playing in your mind. What's playing in my mind is, I'm in the room. I'm in the room with Pete. That's the main thing. I've made it because I'm in the room with Pete, not I've made it because I've been on Live at the Apollo.
And I always find it fascinating because one of the guys on the tryout night came up to me and he said, how do I get into this box?
On the new material nights, you can hear them, they sit here, you can hear them arching in. What's he saying? What's he saying? You know?
And then kind of open spot will come in to thank Pete for putting them on, and you're sat there thinking, get the fuck out of this room. You're not allowed in this room yet. You didn't crush. They crushed that and then come in this room.
Do you let the newbies in here?
No, people come through and say, I'm the new greatest thing. You know, say, well, we'll see. You know, and if there's somebody I particularly don't want to talk to, I'd make a very clear point. Did you not see the private side?
No, it's a combination of a sort of teacher's staff room and a sort of speakeasy or something, but you're not allowed in there. When you start on the Thursday nights doing the open mics, you're not allowed into the booth. That is like going into holies of holies. You might go to the door at the end and say goodbye to Pete. You might stick your head in, but you're not allowed in there. And then once you start doing Saturday, Sundays, you can go in there. And then, by some sort of unwritten rule that everybody understands, once you do Saturdays and Sundays, if you come back and do a Thursday, you can go in there. And then the other acts don't go in there. There's a weird progression, not just in terms of gigs in this venue, but also in terms of are you allowed in the booth.
It's just a cupboard, you know.
What's that?
No, $2.99.
One burger, no custard. Right, shall we make a start?
The film Nico! You guys want to hear some rock and roll comedy? Yeah! Come on, fucking hear Celebration of the King's Head. Do you want to hear some rock and roll comedy? Yeah! Oh my God, you're gonna fucking love this. Look. Oh yeah.
You can play the piano.
Pete's from a musical background, and he has said to me that he much prefers the company of musicians to comedians. And he says musicians are way funnier than comedians in person. So I do wonder why he's chosen to hang out with comedians every sort of Thursday, Saturday, Sunday for like 40 years or something. It's this like, I just imagine him the other nights of the week hanging out with musicians and having a way better time than that.
I don't play.
Ever stop yourself at work and think, what the fuck have I done with my life? I'm having that moment now!
We have lots of bands that sat down here, and they see these mic stands, and they go, what the fuck's happened to those mic stands? Because every fucking comic does this all the time. And what they do is bang stuff around. Useless. Comics have one piece of equipment, and none of them can use it properly.
Evening, cunts!
few years ago, the University of Kent contacted me and a lot of other people in the comedy business around the 80s, when the start of what we now know as alternative comedy, and took 7 boxes from my loft, which my wife has always been telling me to sort out, and they've taken them away and archived them in a big comedy archive.
Oh, look. Hello.
So yeah, the stand-up
See,
archive
name
stuff.
spelt wrong. Look at that.
Yeah.
Archivists, eh?
Yeah. But, you know, it's just, I love seeing those names there and thinking what's down there. So what this is material from the British Stand-Up Comedy Archive, which was established here in 2013 after we got the personal archive of Linda Smith, who is just here.
Ollie got in touch with me a few years back and said, do I have some stuff? And up in my loft, I had all this rubbish that my wife said, can you sort that out? So I realised there was somebody else who would sort it out for me. So we put it in boxes and we sent it here. I would have done this on an Amiga computer, I think.
Yeah. So it was the, you know, if it was 10 years earlier, it would be sort of hand-drawn stuff with lecture set and things. You know, when people first had computers, it was quite limited what you could do with them, so...
Well, still the same publicity shots used by most of the acts.
Still the same material.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting, sort of, who's still going out of those and what they're doing now, you know.
This is of that time. You say you would send a press pack out and it would be done through the post. I mean...
Even that seems like another age, right? Sending something in the post, a physical letter.
Well, also, it was all cash.
Yeah.
You know, there was no booking procedure, really. There was in some of the clubs, but certainly not ours. It was just, if you didn't get in and we were full, that was gone. So 1, 2, look, I'm doing this in the right order now.
Really well.
A guy called Kevin Bridges used to come with his dad when he was 14, come 3 or 4 times a year, and his dad would come with him down from Glasgow, and he was one of the few exceptions. And my wife has the best description of Kevin Bridges ever, which you mustn't run because he'll kill me. When he was 14, he said he already looks like a retired snooker player.
You know, he would list all of our names in Time Out. And I remember every Wednesday when Time Out would come, running to the off license to get Time Out.
So Time Out was quite a big thing, wasn't it?
Absolutely essential. And there was also City Limits. So these, for instance, are clippings from Time Out, which I would have kept because they referred to us, I presume. So these would all be ones that had us mentioned or...
Because that's how you get a gig, isn't it?
Yes, and this would be the comedian's Bible and the audience's Bible as well.
And what was quite interesting was he had a thing of kind of having a word that some the comedian liked, the surreal so-and-so.
Yeah, so you could find anybody here. Veteran offbeat stand-up Norman Lovett, skillful Alistair Barry, enjoyable Andy Robinson.
See, that's useful for them because they could put that on their publicity.
Yeah. I used to like the word punctual. So this is where my life was, and it's now over there. It's interesting though, I don't really can see these. Mark Thomas's, Alexi, Sir Hattie, Robin Ince. People don't know this place exists. It's a really good resource for anybody who's got any interest in the history of comedy in Britain. When Sean died, I found, and I gave it to his brothers, his letter that he wrote to me from Dublin saying, I'm part of a 3-man sketch group,
Oh, right, yeah.
and we want to do The King's Head. And he turned up on his own. First time I'd met him.
Yeah.
And I said, what happened to the other 2? He said, I lost touch with them. So Steve Punt, Vicious Boys, which was... Tony is now one of the top drum and bass DJs and music publishers.
Really?
Especially in Japan.
Do you find that comedians, even if they don't continue doing comedy, they end up being quite successful?
With the exception of you, yes. The thing about comedy is transferable skill.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, it's something that even if you work in another field, it's such a good skill to have, being able to break ice and feel comfortable standing up.
Also, there's a load of logistics as well. You know, people have to find out where the gig is. They've got to get there on time. They've got to make sure that they get paid. They've got to keep their records for tax purposes.
Yeah.
You know, they've got to keep a hold of their material. They've got to keep developing their material.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of skills.
They've got to have a certain drive, haven't they?
They've definitely got to have a drive, that's for sure.
The funniest thing I ever saw here, and probably one of the funniest things I've ever seen, is Kevin McAleer, the Irish storytelling comedian. There isn't a picture of him up. I was sitting here, I remember, maybe 30 people in. It was his own solo show. I loved Kevin McAleer. He'd sort of go on and on and on about the same thing. You didn't really know it was going, and then it would hit you, and you'd find it. So I found it uncontrollably funny. I remember falling off a stool about here onto the floor, laughing at it. There's also, when you've got those kind of weird acts in here, there's a feeling of being trapped, I think. Trapped with nowhere to go.
But then when you have someone on, and I cannot remember who it was, but it was an older gentleman, and I never saw him again. And it was just, the audience did not know what the hell he was doing. There were no jokes. He was just going on and on. He overran, silence in the room. But of course, as a comic, when you see something like that, tears were streaming down my face. But I know I can't say anything bad because Peter's like, everyone, you know, just wish them, you know, they had the courage to get up there, say nice things. And so I went up afterwards and I was like, I don't know what that was. But I could barely talk because I was crying. And luckily we went to a break after that, but it was absolutely beautiful.
We've seen some utterly dreadful acts here, you know, but that's part of it.
I suppose on some level, downstairs at the King's Head felt like a clubhouse for comedy, where I felt part of it.
There's an old joke, an old show business joke, which is that you only get to play downstairs at the King's Head twice in your career, once on the way up and once on the way down. It's good to be back. But the King's Head was always like that. It was one of the first gigs that people did. But it was also one of the last gigs that people did. A lot of comedians, when they were sort of retired by the rest of the circuit, Peter would still give those people gigs. You know, gave them their last chance, if you like. And I saw many comedians kind of on their last legs, still playing the King's Head. But then if they didn't write new material, Peter would give them a hard time about it. And if they still didn't write new material, then he'd drop them. So he would always give people a chance.
It's carte blanche. People ring me up and I give them the first slot available.
So you're kind of building up your 5, if you remember, and then it's time where we've got to jump to the 10. And so I wrote this brand new 5 that I hadn't tested out yet, and I came here to do it, and it went better than my old 5. And I mean, I was, you know, people talk about the rush of doing comedy. You know, there aren't many occasions, genuinely, when people are talking about the buzz of stand-up, that is one of the highlights. That is one of the biggest rushes I've ever had. I got back to Brighton. I was so off my face on adrenaline that I danced down the centre of the road, the whole of Trafalgar Street, just spinning round, because I couldn't believe that I had come to this club and stormed a brand new 5. That definitely goes down as one of the biggest rushes that I've had doing comedy. And I have played the O2 Arena.
I always said that this is always about pure comedy. You come through the door, you wait for the show. The show starts, it's a comedy show, and then at the end, the show finishes and you go home. You go upstairs, have a drink. You don't stand around for a disco, you haven't been eating here before. It's just straightforward, see the show.
You don't allow drunks in, you don't allow big groups in. You know, if someone's looking a bit iffy, they just won't let them in. So it creates a much better atmosphere, and, you know, you're more likely to get a better show.
No one ever asks me when I'm giving out the tickets, who's on tonight? No one's ever asked me in 8 years, because they don't really care. They just come in and sit down and know they're going to get a good night of comedy.
The show is curated. You can feel it, that thought has gone into the sequencing of the comics. You know, the way you would sequence a record, where, like, you know, a banger, a ballad, and you can't just have it all. There's a thoughtfulness to it's curated.
You had an audience that would listen to your ideas, and they weren't It wasn't like doing gigs where you had tables of sort of stag lads in who just want you to take the piss out of them or their mate, or and make it all about them. You know, what was always great about Downstairs of the King's Head is that you have an audience who have come to hear what the comedian has to say. What is the comedian's take on the world? What's this guy's view of life? And you know, and they weren't an easy audience, because if a comedian had nothing to say or wasn't particularly very funny, then the audience wouldn't laugh much. And having silence down here in a room like this is really not very nice.
Comedy is something that you can't do in front of a mirror. You can probably practice singing, you can probably practice your lines if you're acting, but comedy, you need that reaction. And down here, the reaction is always so supportive and friendly, because I think the people know what the club's about, and it's about nurturing comedy.
Yeah, you trust the audience here, definitely.
2 years ago, I had a tumour removed, and they pulled out 20 centimetres of colon. Lucky I didn't get a bag, and I did 3 months of chemo, and then I've been cancer clear. And then this January, the figures looked bad, so they took me in again, did a PET scan, and now I have terminal cancer, which could be very short. I'm now having chemo, which is why my hair's dropping out a bit, as a palliative measure to buy some time, but it is terminal. So it's just a question of when. And unfortunately, it's in the liver and the peritoneum, which isn't a good place because it's a delivery system. So all of this thing is sort of trying to get some of this down before, you know, I get too weak to do so, and planning for the future so the club has somewhere to go on to which isn't a poison chalice.
He's as important as the microphone, he's as important as the lights, he's as important as the audience. He's just there. He's part of the comedy scene, and he's like a pillar, isn't he? He's someone you can trust. He's someone who knows everybody. It won't be the same without him, that's for certain.
We both got ill, so we've been cancer buddies, sorry. So I think that prompted a bit of closeness as well, because we both kind of had a very similar attitude to it, which was, don't do this, oh, you know. And he's had a terrible sense of humour about it, and so we've been through the wars a bit. So that's been, God, I'm actually hysterical. But yeah, that's been nice. Look, I'm so stoic about it all. Yeah, I think that's been quite nice, because you don't know till you hit something like that, what it's like. So I think it's quite nice to share that with someone, that you can say all the worst possible things about treatment and your attitude to it and other people's attitude towards you. And he has really funny gags about that. Like, he's made me laugh when he's on an expensive treatment and he says, yeah, it's 21 grand a pop, but that's just the sandwiches, which is such a ridiculously cheap gag. But I love it, and I think that's bonded us quite a lot, which is quite sad. And obviously we're sleeping together as well, so that's nice.
You know, I feel very close to Peter, and he's been a friend for a long, long time. And yeah, it's difficult to think of this place or comedy in general without him. And it's so sad, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's an important part of comedy, isn't he?
He is. He'd be a cog that's sorely missed and will not be replaced.
Well, no, because it might all work out fine, and then we'll all look really stupid. I'll go, oh, God, I need to do... I was only lovely about you because...
I learned 3 things, and I call them the Peter principles, right? And they're just be polite, be professional, and just listen to people who you respect for comments, and just take it in and take it on board and risk, you know? And he promotes that. He promotes that, and I think you see that in the people who play here regularly. And yeah, I'll always be thankful for that.
We might be having ructions with the brewery, because over the years I don't own the bricks and mortar, so I have to work with the brewery, and every 3 or 4 years there's a change of management and a change of area manager. They come with bright ideas, but they're They are so behind with money they've lost during the 2 years of lockdown. They don't have a garden here, so they made no money. I'm under pressure to provide food and drink during the show, stuff that I really goes against all my principles. So it's always a difficult balancing act, but at the moment, I'm all right with it, but it's going to be a point soon where I think we might be moving.
Yeah, this has been here for a long time. Hopefully your film will make the brewery appreciate what they've got.
When you come back to this club, there's that sense of history, and especially for me, an attachment to the, I sound like an old fart now, but to the comedy that I was brought up on, that I understood and I knew. And it's lovely to come back here and know that this club is, it's still going. And as you get older, that things disappear, and the clubs that you started out at, they disappear, and then those comedians don't do it anymore, or those comedians have shot off to stardom. And it's always wonderful knowing that this is still here, and it's still one of, if not the best, comedy clubs in London.
I came to London not knowing anyone. My mum was terrified that I'd come here. She tried to stop me coming. My uncle Roger, who lived in Canada, supported me and said I should follow my dreams. And he sent me a T-shirt of the strip club that he'd set up in Vancouver. Eventually it went bust, the strip club, but he sent me the T-shirt to show that you should try to follow your dreams. His dreams were slightly more fevered than mine, by the looks of it. I feel a bit overwhelmed thinking about that now.
It would be a tragedy to lose it. We need... It's more than just a comedy club. It's a kind of hub. It's a sort of centre of comedy where comedians can gather. I mean, it's a place where quite often, if I'm gigging in London and I've been on early and I'm driving past here, I might come in for a pint and a chat with the people who are on, and just catch the last act who's on here. I've done that many times over the years.
Simon Munnery says, in Russia, nostalgia is regarded as an illness, or at least it used to be in the good old days. But there's also something sad about coming here.
He's very much one of us. He's very supportive.
There's a certain family-like atmosphere in this ever-changing world of celebrity and fame and all the other things that happen, and even just styles of comedy and everything like that. Peter's there, he's going to be in his booth, and he's going to be giving advice to new acts and helping them progress.
And it's a local gig.
Well, that is also that as well. I can walk it.
You genuinely can say, Peter, that you've helped to be part of what has been an astounding actual growth in something, cultural thing in the country. It is quite clear that the country was absolutely brimful of brilliant comic people, and they've had an opportunity to do something with that, which they wouldn't have had if it hadn't been for places like the King's Head.
Yeah, there are very few people who haven't been through at some point.
Yeah.
And interestingly, somebody came the other day who's quite well known in Ireland and a very well known comic generally. I sort of said, listen, we can't afford you. He said, no, it's not the point. I have to do the King's Head because I haven't played it yet,
Really?
Yeah, he said, I want to do it.
Nice.
And he's, since made the mistake of coming back a second time. So they never learn.
Something happened in that place, and you can't put your finger on it, but it became, even on a night when there was only 15 or 20 people in there was something very nice about that space.
One of the busy nights, then.
Yes. Yes. One of the ones where we all got paid.
Almost made a profit. It was never about the money.
Yeah.
That's the legacy.
No, it was never about the money. It isn't about the money.
I will go to my grave knowing that those 2 hours every now and again make a difference, much more so than somebody legislating in Parliament sometimes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And the few times that I have in my life, I have cried laughing, dying laughing, just crying with laughter is just such an amazing experience.
Yeah, it's an important experience.
Peter Grahame and Downstairs at the King's Head are an integral part of the UK comedy ecosystem, of the whole infrastructure. And without this club and Peter, comedy would be a very different place.
He's the king of the King's Head. Of all the royalty and body part themed comedy venues in the UK, downstairs at the King's Head, my favorite by far.
For me personally, those days of starting out in comedy were my favourite, and Pete was a big part of that.
Clubs are a reflection of the promoter, the people who actually, built the place and created this just marvelous, wonderful place of comedy.
It's just one of those places that, when you think about comedy in London, this is it.
I think I've probably been as happy as I've ever been in this room, really.
A guy called Peter never goes there. No one's ever done coke in the loo. Whenever I do a gig there, I always do something new. It's situated somewhere near Norfolk. It's nowhere near Crouch End. And nobody who's ever been there has ever made a new friend. The audience is made up of wankers. The atmosphere's miserable and cold. It isn't beloved by comedians, and it isn't 40 years old. Thank you.
Here's for another 40 years.
Lovely. Thanks, man. Perfect.
All right, mate.
So nice to talk about this place.
Happy?
Yeah. Cheers, mate.
That didn't sound like completely wanky about like the tapestry of the industry, did it?
I thought it sounded really nice.
Yeah, do I get some travel money, by the way?
I'll get you lunch.
Okay.
You look fabulous, thank you.
Thank you, Jojo. Sorry we made you wait.
Thanks, Stu.
Is that all right?
I want to keep the bit where I said I've done a few poos in these loos.
That's all right, enough?
That's enough, yeah.
Yeah, good. Is that enough?
No, go on.
So we're back end of November. The chemo's worked well, and I had a meeting on Friday with my German surgeon at the Royal Free, Mr. Pollock. I'll leave the gap now for you to do your own jokes. And I'm set for a big operation next week at the Royal Free Hospital to remove any cancerous tissue from my liver, which it appears is the only place it still is. I mean, there's no guarantee. There may be other stuff there, but at the moment that means that they're buying me some more time. I'll be in intensive care for a week or so and then 4 weeks of recovery, but still everything heading in the right direction and a lot better than the prognosis in February of 6 to 9 months to live. So you never know. Okay, it's a bit later. Oh, and the hair's growing back, obviously. Proper teddy boy now. Quiff.
Honestly, it's a huge honour to give a Lifetime Achievement to Comedy Award to Mr. Peter Grahame.
I'm afraid I can't do that gag where the speech just trails out over the floor. I've had to put it into one of these that's used up all my memory. So that's the joke. So listen, about 800 years ago, Hugh and I started the room and we wanted a nice, warm, a space with a patient audience where we could help, encourage and develop and nurture new talent.
And, you know, it was Crouch End. It was the early 80s. We were so woke. You know, we were up before the birds, you know, or women as they're now called. The shows were varied. You know, we had musical acts, we had special acts. It was very different. And then as the whole scene shifted and it became much more of a straightforward comedy show, so the dressing room got more miserable. And it's nice to see so many of you. Now, look, I've watched the circuit grow from a small smattering of rooms doing political cabaret to a business that's now multi-million pounds. And, you know, we are supplying all the light entertainment for the BBC, which is incredible, really. And genuinely, it's a real pleasure to be part of people's first steps into paid work. Genuinely, we're very proud of that. The next few years are going to be tough. Counterintuitively, the arts thrive in recessions, and comedy is one of the cheaper, more accessible forms of entertainment. And people ask why I still enjoy doing it. It's because I still get a genuine pleasure out of seeing people leave the club after a couple of hours and you've, you know, taken 2 hours out of their lives and made them forget how miserable the world is. And, you know, you can't put a price on a laugh, and that's why I pay so bad. Listen, I've seen some of the past recipients of this award, and I note that this award has been made quite often posthumously. I don't know, am I doing something wrong? No, genuinely, and this is absolutely true, some of you know this. In February last year, I was given 6 to 9 months to live. And I've had a big run of chemo this year. And last Friday, I saw my surgeons who'd taken half my liver out last week, 3 weeks ago. And I seem to be clear of cancer. Thank you, Phil. A great honour to be given to this award by my friends, my colleagues, my peers. You know, thanks to everybody who's been part of the club over the years and other places I run, especially Hugh, who set it up, many of you know, and all the staff, the audiences, the acts. In the last year, Georgina, who's covered for me so much. And this award also goes to all the acts in the future, but the good ones, not the shit ones. Thanks again.